So today I'd like to introduce to you the basics of the analytical process. And this will be sort of the introduction to, analytical chemistry. So what is analytical chemistry? Analytical chemistry is the study of the chemical composition of materials. And materials can be nature's materials, they can be organic, or they can be artificial materials that are man-made. And so chemistry of measurements, or rather analytical chemistry, is the chemistry of measurement generally of matter and its life forms, or the behavior, of those life forms. As such, it is a very wide field that is an interface of organic, inorganic, and the different types of materials, as well as the physical chemistry. And so it's a very interdisciplinary, field. Think about it. In a sample specimen, analytical chemists answer the following type of questions. What chemical species is present? And the chemical species can be elements, they can be ions, they can be molecules, and you're trying to answer what is present, in a chemical or rather in a sample specimen. And that is what you refer to as qualitative chemical analysis, when you're just looking for what is present. But in most cases, you're not just looking for what is present, but you want to know how much of that chemical entity is present. And that is what you refer to as quantitative chemical analysis. You are looking to quantify, how much is present. For most societal problems that you're gonna face in analytical chemistry, be it environmental analytics, food analytics, clinical diagnostics, you'll be looking to answer, both of those questions. And so in most cases, you'll be doing not only quantitative, but also, qualitative chemical analysis. Now, give you an example of scenarios, wide-ranging scenarios, that are in the purview of analytical chemistry, just to show you, how much analytical chemistry intersects with the society and how much we actually use analytical chemistry, to solve problems, in the community. As I'm highlighting, these scenarios, think about whether we are looking for a qualitative solution or a quantitative solution, or even both, right? So think about that. So case number one, deaths resulting from different types of cancer have grown consistently over the years. Indeed, it's becoming almost a pandemic, in many countries. So the question to the analytical chemist, is it possible to get analytical methods that can indicate signs of disease onset very early on? Because I think we all know with the cancer issues, if at all it can be detected very early, the prognosis often is very good. And this is in the purview of biomarker research. So can we identify, the early proteins, or what you call biomarkers, that would indicate, that a person may be predisposed, to getting different types of cancer. And there are lots of players, analytical chemists, who are working on this type of work. Case number two, you've been asked to investigate, the possible causes of, say, Parkinson's or even cancers that are localized in a small coastal town in India. And of course, I just took an example. You suspect food contamination is a possible cause. Again, another analytical problem. There's so many different types of carcinogens out there. Be it pesticides, be it toxins, be it plasticizers, and so forth. It's a very complicated problem, but yet a big industry, where analytical chemists are needed. Case number 3. The First Nation communities have used herbal remedies, for a long time. One of these plant species, and I took an example, is diamond willow fungus. It's a mushroom. And you've been asked to identify the biochemicals, be it phytochemicals, polyphenols, and so on, in these plant species so that you can advise maybe the First Nations or even beyond what is the appropriate dosage, to use when people are using diamond willow fungus extract. So again, a very, very wide area of research in terms of detecting phytochemicals or biochemicals in the environment, especially in plants. In fact, if you think about, the modern day medicine, it started, from natural products. That's how it started. Things like penicillin and so forth. It started, from products, from natural products. Another example, and I'm hoping, with all these different examples, you find your area of interest. Opioid drug overdose is a pandemic, in our time, here in Edmonton, in Vancouver, across the globe. Opioid use is a big problem. You've been asked as an analytical chemist to develop methods that can quickly screen patient's urine, possibly saliva, blood, or even sweat to identify the possible drugs that may be a potential patient who is overdosed has consumed. This data is useful, for rapid patient medical intervention. So again, you have to think about what is the appropriate analytical method that can solve that problem. You want the result quickly, and yet you do not know what type of a drug, the patient, may have been poisoned by. And as such, you can see sort of this one is a qualitative, type of chemical analysis. And depending on what it is, qualitative chemical analysis or quantitative, is going to determine what type of analytical method that you're going to choose. And in this course, of course, you're going to learn so many different types of analytical methods. And so the challenge for the analytical chemist is to interrogate and think what is the best analytical method to use for a certain, kind of problem, depending on the needs. Maybe case number 5, there was a student who was interested in paleontology, and I mentioned, that there is a connection between paleontology, with analytical chemistry. You have been asked to help a team of paleontologists or paleoecologists to provide evidence on possible diets of human fossils, possibly dated 10,000 years old. Your lab has been donated with those bones, and you are required, to try and attempt, to answer that complex problem. So again, you can see it's more of a qualitative chemical analysis. You'll be looking probably to digest the bones and detect, things like, metals that are present, calcium and so forth, to identify and to connect it to possible types of diets, people used to consume a long time ago. So another scenario, the integrity of Olympians is in question because of the somewhat prevalent use of custom designer performance enhancing drugs. And there's so many in the markets, that make it very difficult, to clarify and to identify which potential drug may be a potentially suspect, Olympian may have used. There are up to 500 different active constituents of drugs that are commonly used. There are beta blockers, there are stimulants, there are diuretics, narcotics, opioids too, analgesics and so forth. Very, very complicated problem. And again, you can see in this case it's going to be sort of both. First, qualitative chemical analysis to try and figure out what type of chemical is present in whatever biological fluid, often blood is used in this case, and then to quantify how much is present. Yeah, case number 7, you've been asked to investigate the decline in bee population in Alberta, and you suspect the possible use of pesticides in canola farms are to blame. And so here is another problem, and often your neonicotinoids, have been known to sort of, poison and reduce a bee's population. So you've got this task of trying to determine, other than the neonicotinoid, are there other types of pesticides, that are causing this problem? Again, you can see the qualitative, chemical analysis. That's where you start, but you still later on need to quantify how much of the pesticide residue, is present, maybe in the air, in the soil, in the water. Complicated problem in the purview of the analytical chemistry. Maybe another scenario, that would interest, those of you in psychology or interested in clinical medicine or clinical diagnostics. Mental health is a major problem of our time. You've been asked to develop a wearable sensor that can smell stress. And of course, I took this, from my research group. We do work on making wearable sensors, for smelling the mood, for smelling stress, and it's possible, to do that. So again, you can see this one is more of a qualitative chemical analysis, but again, you still need to quantify what the stress indicators, things like the cortisol hormone and other types of hormones that could, compounds that could be present, such as the dopamines, and other neurotransmitters and so forth. So again, you can see how wide of a scope, analytical chemistry, can traverse. Another good problem that I took from our research group here in McEwan that we work on, you've been asked as a chemist to develop a COVID-19 breathalyzer. I think you all know that when you're trying to detect COVID-19, you take, a nose swab, but often they have to take that to the lab to do RNA, detection, which takes a long time. So before you get the results that possibly, you've been exposed to COVID-19, then it's a couple of weeks. A better approach, would be to get very quick sensors, that you can get the results right away. And so can you make a breathalyzer that you just need to sneeze on it or exhale on it, and it can tell you, potentially if you've got the COVID-19. Very similar to the alcohol breathalyzers, cannabis breathalyzers, and so forth. So again, another area of research, where analytical chemists are really, really needed, to solve these complex situations. And so you're going to find me giving you quite a bit of examples, partly of what I do in my lab, and also what other professors in McEwan do in their labs as well. And how sometimes you can even get involved, in those types of research projects, because we encourage, students to engage with professors, in this training, hands-on training opportunities. So my lab does most of these wearable sensors, for different types of analytics, environment, drug therapeutics, human performance, food analytics, and even livestock, and plant wearables. And when we typically fabricate very, very small devices, a little bit different from what you're gonna see in your real lab that we start on Tuesday, because most of the labs, the conventional way is using very expensive instrumentation that require the sample to be brought to the lab, which is time consuming and expensive, and so on. And so my research often is focused on designing very small sensors that can be taken to the field, for clinical diagnostics, and that way you get the results, right away. Maybe more about that, later as we go along. But again, if at all you're interested in any of that stuff, maybe for your term project even, you can talk to me about that. So maybe you're asking, and I think this is important. I like always to connect whatever we learn in class with the economics. You are here to be trained, but you're not always being McEwen. Most likely, you're gonna head out in just 4 years, and you're gonna be looking for a job. So what types of jobs are there for analytical chemists? As I said before, analytical chemist is very interdisciplinary. And so you can fit in the food industry, clinical diagnostics, material science, and so forth. So I'll give you a list, of potential industries, that you can get into. And our students get into things as we do an internship. Maybe I should mention that. We do an internship course called the Chem 497, where we take the students to the industry and they work there for credit, for a semester. And you can, when you do your third year chemistry, you're eligible, to apply for those internships. And so some of our students, go into doing these kinds of areas as far as jobs are concerned. For example, you can go and fit in the research and development in pharmaceutical companies. And we've had students, do that, for their co-ops in the Chem 497. You can also go and do quality control analysis, for oil companies or even food companies, or even, in environmental analytics. And again, we've had students do that in the city. You can also go and do drug representative, which is often, and I did this job before I became a professor actually, where you go and market, different pharmaceutical formulations, and you explain to the doctors, how those formulations actually work. You're sort of a scientist, but a marketer scientist, for pharmaceutical, type of formulations and products. You can also do analytical instrumentation development, and you can see that's what I do, in my lab, where we fabricate sensors, and so we are developing, the equipment, that are used. Now, you can also do research in different areas, such as genomics. There's somebody interested in genetics, it has a lot of analytical chemistry involved. You can do glycomics, if at all you're trying to analyze different types of glycoproteins in plants, for example, and so forth. You can also do things like metabolomics, which sort of I touched on it. When you consume a drug, it's metabolized, in the body. And often you'll be looking, at the metabolites, that come from the urine, or from breath, or even from sweat, to try and determine what somebody actually took. And sort of that is in the purview, of forensic science. And some of you say are interested in forensic science, totally interconnected, with analytical chemistry. Food industry, some students, fit in the food industry, as food analysts, to monitor the quality, of foods. Chemical industries, such as Dow, to try and make plastics and to characterize those types of plastics or other types of functional materials. Another big industry, that I'm gonna point you at is the data visualization analytics. What you guys are gonna do in this course is a lot of data treatment. And of course, you guys have heard about data analytics, sort of the next big thing in artificial intelligence. And again, this is an area of major growth. Because as you know, quantitative chemical analysis is all about generating data and then making sense out of that data. And to make sense out of that data, often you need to visualize it, and so on, so that you can extract whatever you're looking for. So again, is in the field of so-called chemometrics, which intersects, a lot with computer science. So for some of you, who really like to play with data, and of course all of us in analytical chemistry, you'll have to get used and get the skills that you need to play with data. I point you to this field. It's a booming field. So just to conclude, again, analytical chemistry, can be divided into those categories, based on the problem, that you're solving: quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. Okay. So in the next segment, I'm gonna spend some time to talk about the analytical sample challenge. What is the biggest analytical problem, that makes it very, very challenging, to do either qualitative chemical analysis or a quantitative chemical analysis. What is the biggest challenge that you should be trained in solving, in order to become a good chemist? And so that's going to be, in the next video on the biggest analytical sample challenge.